Welcome to Mytality, a podcast about persevering through the cancer experience. If you've ever had to deal with cancer for you or a loved one, being diagnosed with it can be a scary thing. No one wants to hear that they have or may have cancer. And there isn't a one-size-fits-all approach regarding what you should do when you are diagnosed. But what we do know is that how you address, react, and adjust to the news can have a profound impact toward a positive outcome. I'm your host, Gary Chrisy. I'm a 2-time cancer patient who has also experienced recurrence. My first experience was with a rare form of testicular cancer, but my second experience was much more alarming. I was in the emergency room with severe bleeding from stage 4 bladder cancer that had metastasized to my lung. I suspected something was wrong at the time, but I've been told that bleeding was due to an enlarged prostate. I wasn't prepared for the news, and I certainly wasn't prepared for what I was supposed to do afterwards. I didn't hear a word the doctor said to me after I was told. I was too shocked, and I was definitely not prepared for what was ahead: the chemo, the treatments, the scans, the surgeries, the medication, but most of all, the side effects. Then when the cancer recurred 2 years later, I was hit again. And I have to say, hearing the news for the third time wasn't any easier. I praise God, however, that I'm currently in remission. My co-host today is Reverend Chrisy Ennen. She's the senior pastor at First Presbyterian Church in Gulf Shores, Alabama. She's a runner, a former race director, an exercise buff, an avid reader, has multiple hobbies and interests, but she is also a breast cancer patient and an advocate for genetic testing and cancer research. In addition to her own experience, Chrisy assisted her mother during her mother's healing and recovery from breast cancer as well. She and I want to share with you a few things from our experience that we believe will help you, especially if you've been recently diagnosed. Welcome to the show, Chrisy. Really delighted that you're here and things. I've talked a little bit about my cancer experience, and I'd like for you to share a little bit about yours too, to the extent that you're comfortable. I know that we both have cancer, but as you know, that doesn't mean that the cancer is the same.
That's right.
And even if you have the same cancer, it can be different. Mm-hmm. And every individual is different, and how people react are different. So it would really be helpful if we could hear a little bit about your story.
About 7.5 years ago, my mom was diagnosed with breast cancer.
Okay.
And it was a very small area, lumpectomy, radiation. I walked her through that. It was obviously scary because cancer is scary.
Right.
But she's done well, no recurrence whatsoever. So little over 2 years ago, I went in for my annual mammogram because I've just been faithful to do that.
Excellent.
And at that appointment, they said, we're going to pull you back in and do another mammogram. And then they sat me back down and they said, okay, we're going to do an ultrasound. And then they sat me back down and they said, okay, we're going to have the radiologist come and do the ultrasound. Mm-hmm. And so after that, the radiologist said, I see something. I want to biopsy it today. And so I'm by myself because I just went for a mammogram.
That all happened at the same day?
That all happened the same day.
Wow.
Fortunately, I had met who turned out to be my breast surgeon previously because I just wanted to establish in case something ever came up. And so she came across the hall and calmed me down and talked me through it and whatever, and they did the biopsy. And then she called me, and I remember I was in my car. I was headed to work. And my phone rang, and I saw that it was her. So I was like, okay, I'll answer this. And I heard cancer, and I have no idea what else she said because I'm 49 years old.
Right.
What? So after the initial shock wears off and you start to see the doctors more and you start to ask more questions and everything. And one of the things, because my mother had breast cancer, they wanted to do genetic testing, and so they did and found out that I was BRCA2 positive.
Okay.
Which means higher incidence of breast cancer recurrence, ovarian cancer, pancreatic cancer.
Oh, my goodness.
Melanoma, and in men, prostate cancer.
Is that
well,
right?
My grandfather, my mother's father, died of prostate cancer. And so we did that. And fortunately, neither of my sisters and neither of my children are positive for that gene. So
Excellent.
it didn't get passed on, and we're really glad about that. But that changed my diagnosis.
Oh, absolutely.
And the process that we were going to have to go through to treat it.
May I ask, what now was the experience with what your mother went through and what you did? Was it very similar, or was it even different, even though you carried that genetic?
It was so different because she had ductal cancer, and my cancer was not ductal. It happened where the milk is created rather than in the milk duct.
Oh.
So lobular was mine and ductal is hers. Ductal forms in a mass. Lobular forms kind of in lines.
Okay.
And so lobular can be a little more tricky.
Right.
Anyway, and then you add the BRCA2, that immediately took a lumpectomy off the table.
Okay. Wow, that it really is interesting. So what did you do, and what did you do right, or what would you have done differently?
Obviously, you have to have conversations with, husband and mom and kids,
Yes.
and that's all difficult. But I'm a problem solver by nature.
Yeah.
I'm a pastor, so that's what I do. I solve problems. And so my way of handling this was, one of the first things I did was grab a notebook.
Okay. Wow.
And I wrote down dates. Every doctor's appointment, I wrote down exactly what they said. In between doctor's appointments, I wrote down how angry I was.
Wow, that is so
I journaled
smart.
it because I needed to get that out. I had a hard conversation with my husband at one point, because he said to me, "This is happening in your body, not my body. I don't know what to do." And I said, "Well, I'm sad. And so you can't tell me it's going to be okay right now because we don't know that."
Right.
And so what I need you to do is allow me to be sad.
Right.
And that's what we have to do with our loved ones, right?
You're right. Absolutely.
We have to tell what we actually need
Yeah.
and what we don't need
Because
from
they
them.
don't know. They're not
They
mind
don't
readers,
know.
and it is and they are going through their own emotions and things. And many times I was more of a consoler than I was being
Yes.
consoled because of that, and it being cognizant that they're going through a separate set of emotions
Yes,
because they feel
absolutely.
helpless too.
They
don't
feel helpless too, but in a different way.
But you know what, Chrissy? What you did, writing that down was so important. I think it was just so smart because I know when I was told, you just don't hear anything after that. And writing down the instructions, because then even though my wife might come to some of the appointments with me, she heard things that I didn't, and I heard things that she didn't, and it was so good. I wish I would have written things down.
Yeah, it was really important to write all that down because then, when I have to figure out what did they say, I could go back and literally read it.
Yes.
And that was just so helpful to me.
Right.
That was so helpful to me.
Other things is you have to be an advocate for yourself.
Yes.
That writing it down helps to know what the next steps are, or if there was something that the physician said that you don't understand. It's so good to be an advocate and go back and really understand it for yourself.
Right. And when you know what they've said, if something doesn't mesh up later. So, for example,
Correct.
after my first mastectomy, and they did all of the pathology and everything, they needed to send my tumor away for a more specialized test that would tell us whether or not I had a high chance of recurrence. And they said it would take about 6 weeks. And we got to about 7 weeks, and I hadn't heard anything.
Right.
And so I called my physician, and she went and started looking, and it turns out someone in the pathology lab never sent it off.
Oh, my goodness.
And so then we had to wait another 6 weeks.
Right.
But because I had a date, the day that I knew that she said, "I'm sending this off," I knew when I needed to follow up. because I hadn't heard anything.
Well, you know what? We do forget that physicians are human also.
Yeah.
And that's one of the I know some people are afraid to question a physician because they know best and that's what they went to school for and think, but that's not really the case necessarily.
Well,
they're human.
And you have to be able to say, I'm not comfortable with this, or I'm unhappy with this. What do we need to do differently? And you have to have a good relationship with those doctors, whether it's surgeons or oncologists or radiation oncologists. You have to have a good relationship and be able to tell them what you think.
Oh, absolutely.
And how you're feeling. And if you don't have that kind of relationship, you might want to find a different doctor.
No, absolutely. And just like what we said with family members, you have to tell them because they can't read their mind. Well, the physician can't read our mind either. If we're not feeling good, if they prescribe something that didn't really work or it's not making it, we got to tell them that because they're thinking everything's okay if we just say, fine, I'm fine.
And I actually had to do that. After all the surgeries, I was put on a hormone blocker because my cancer was hormone receptor positive. And the first one he put me on made me miserable.
Sure.
And I walked in for a checkup, and he said, how you feeling? I said, terrible. I hate this thing. And he said, okay, then let's try something else.
Yes. And they can. They
can do that.
Yeah, we're blessed at this time of age where we have different avenues we can try. So it's never be afraid to tell the doctor that something's not working or feeling right. With you.
I also think, one of the things that people often do after they get a diagnosis is they hop on the internet.
I know.
And there are good things that can happen when you do that, but there are also rabbit holes that you can go way down that are not good for you.
Correct.
And so I found, for me, it was much better if I asked the detailed questions in the doctor's office rather than trying to do internet research.
Absolutely.
That then, would send me to not a very good place because then I'd be like, well, I'm going to die.
You have to read it with a grain of salt in it, but you can glean some good information, but not to take that as truth yet until you do talk to your physician, because they can give you the real story about things.
And especially early on.
I know.
Looking up early on is a terrible thing because you don't know how far advanced it is. You don't know exactly the type of cancer. You don't know all of the details. And so you can find really bad information because it's not applicable to what you are experiencing.
Another place, and I hate to say this, but another bad place where I could get bad information is sometimes with friends or family who mean well. They mean well, but they just say the wrong thing, or they give you advice about what you should try, or if you should, you should eat this or not do that, or blah blah blah. You have to treat that sometimes just like the internet.
Yeah, you have to be choosy about who and what you're going to listen to. But, I needed to hear stories from other people of their experiences, but I knew who I wanted to hear those from because I knew their character. I knew they weren't going to try and scare me. They were just going to give me their experience.
Right.
And then those were the people that I knew I could lean on when I was having a bad day or I was wondering what to do about this, that, or the other. It was interesting because about 5 years before I got cancer, the gal that lives next door to us had gotten breast cancer. And so as we we'd moved into the neighborhood and she and I got to know each other, I got to know that about her. What a blessing it was then for me because she knew what I was going through. That woman came over and scrubbed my shower more than once, brought me food, just said, hey, let me take care of the dogs today, because she knew what it was like, but she wasn't trying to tell me what I was supposed to feel.
I do tend to have to be careful. If someone asks me about that, someone who's been diagnosed with bladder cancer in particular, and what my experience was, and I am careful because mine was so advanced by the time I got it that it's probably not applicable to them, and I could really scare them to death about what was happening. So I do try very hard to. I want to grab as much information as I can, but I also am real careful about what information I
Well,
give out.
and the same here, you know, with the BRCA2 diagnosis, that meant that I had to have 2 mastectomies. I had to have both breasts removed. I had to have a hysterectomy, you know, because I had to lower those risks. Well, most people with breast cancer don't have the BRCA1 or BRCA2 genes. It's just a single incident so mine could look a whole lot worse.
May I ask, because I don't know the answer to this question, do you have children?
I do. I have a 24-year-old daughter and a 21-year-old son.
And how has this affected, particularly the genetic testing and things? Are much more cautious? Or are they taking control of their health? And
it was really scary at first, but they have been tested, and they are both negative for that gene.
Are they really?
So that is a really, really good thing. But I think it did make them go, oh, we need to be aware of what's happening in our own bodies.
Yeah.
Even if we don't have this gene.
Absolutely, because you just never know what's going to come up. I want to go down a different avenue for just a second, but it's even more important. I think when I was first diagnosed, one of the things you don't think about asking about are side effects of what's going to happen. They talk about, this is what we're going to do. This is the treatment we're going to have. This is either the chemo or the radiation or the blah, blah, blah. This medication is what we're going to be putting you on. Never did I ask up front, what are the side effects? And wow, I'm telling you, cancer was one thing. The side effects and the post things, the radiation, the chemo, all of those side effects has been more bothersome than the cancer itself sometimes.
Yes, absolutely. And so, like you're saying, it's good to ask what those are.
Right.
Because, I mean, you think about when you hear the word chemotherapy, you think, oh, I'm going to lose my hair, which I did. Oh, I'm going to feel sick, which I did. I didn't know that I could get sores in my mouth.
I know.
I didn't know that I would lose all the hair in my nose and how difficult that would make breathing. Just those little things you just don't. That's not a general knowledge. You have to ask those questions specifically.
Correct. But then other things is the chemotherapy that I had damaged my kidneys, and in a way, my pancreas, so now I have diabetes, now I have some heart problems because it affected and all the long-term things is what I'm dealing with now.
Yeah.
And I should have asked more questions related to, so what, I know that they were, and I am so thankful that chemo saved my life.
Right.
And that the doctors did, and that was the short term. But I'm alive, and now the long term is what... I want to be more cognizant of that, of other cancer patients too. That just because they say I'm cancer free doesn't mean they're free from the cancer experience. And that can be devastating.
Well, even the steroids that you are given during chemotherapy and how those affect your body. I mean, they puff you up, they make you hold water, all these things. I didn't know that was part of the process, that there would be steroids alongside the chemotherapy, which then caused some weight gain, caused some things that, long term are not healthy.
One positive out of all of this. I know one of the things that I wanted to do when I started out is I don't know why I got it. And I'm not going to blame myself for what I might have eaten or what I've done, what my lifestyle, or any of that stuff. I'm going to give myself grace in regards to that. I am looking at what God has wanted me to learn from this. There's sometimes I've told God I'm done learning, and if He wants to let it go, I'm okay with the process and things. But I am so much more compassionate now, and I'm so much more outwardly than I am inwardly. And I know you're a pastor, and it's your job to be like that. But even you are human, and I wonder if you feel the same way about that.
Yeah. I mean, there was a time when I had to kind of when you're going through treatment, you kind of have to focus in on yourself because you have to get better. But I mean, I naturally am someone who wants to care for others, but I definitely am more aware
Yes.
of what other people are going through. We have someone right now in our congregation that's fighting cancer. And so I know the questions to ask her.
Right.
What are you, specifically, how are you feeling? Are you feeling sick? Are you losing your hair? Are you, asking these questions? And then she can answer me and say, yeah, I'm having a rough time because of this.
Right.
And it makes a difference to people because
It
they
makes a
know
huge
that they know we've been there and we can be more compassionate.
Well, I'm so grateful that you came to the podcast simply because that's exactly what we want out of Mytality podcast is to let people know that we are here for them and that we do have resources on the website about where they can go and for the different type of cancers as well as assistance because the cancer experience isn't just physical. It's emotional, it's spiritual, but it's also financial. And some people choose between whether they pay the rent or get chemo, and we just don't want that to happen.
Right. Absolutely.
And so I do encourage that, like you said, journal, write down the questions. Don't be afraid to ask, but also don't be afraid to be an advocate for yourself.
Yeah, absolutely.
I am so grateful that you came, and thank you so much for being on the show.
Thanks for having me.
Chrisy and I are interested in hearing your story. We'd like to hear what you're going through, the challenges you faced or are facing, and the successes you've had. We'd also like to pray for you, encourage you and your family, and learn how we can help. If you would, please email me at mytalitypodcast@gmail.com. My name is Gary. And if you have a specific question you'd like to ask Chrisy, please don't hesitate to do so. You can email me, and I'll be sure Chrisy gets your message. She'd like to encourage you and pray for you as well. And be sure to get on our website at mytalitypodcast.com. We'll have a complete list of the do's and don'ts about what you should and shouldn't do when you're first diagnosed. We'll also have resources on various cancers and the assistance that's available to you for a variety of emotional, spiritual, physical, and financial support. But most of all, we want to be sure you're okay and that you have the support you need to fight this insidious disease. People who know me know my favorite quote is by Mae West, also attributed to Joe Louis. They said, if you only live once, but if you do it right, once is enough. We not only want you to live to beat cancer, we want you to live well. So by all means, do what you can do to make sure this is one life you have is the best that it can be. Stay well, everyone, and God bless.